In the heart of a sun-scorched African village, where the dust clung to bare feet like a second skin and the wind whispered through cracked huts and bent banana trees, lived a woman named Neria. Her name meant Lamp of God, and truly, she glowed brighter than most. Her eyes, deep like rivers in drought season, held secrets and strength. Her skin shimmered with the richness of mahogany oil, and her presence could silence the market crowd more surely than any chief's decree. But to Obina, her husband of 5 years, she was just another transaction waiting to happen. For in Obina's eyes, nothing was sacred, not tradition, not love, not even the soft laughter of the woman who once stood beside him at the altar with nothing but hope in her heart and a red coral necklace around her throat. Obina had always been ambitious, not the kind that builds kingdoms but the kind that counts coins while kingdoms burn. He started with small trades, palm oil for salt, yams for linen, livestock for grain. But he wanted more: land, titles, recognition. And he knew wealth rarely came from sweat alone. It came from strategy and sacrifices. The first time Chief Zuberi visited their home, he came with laughter, praise, and wine. The old man was revered in the region, a wealthy widowmaker with 3 wives already and land that stretched beyond the hills where even the goats feared to wander. He was known to by loyalty, respect, and flesh, and he had taken a liking to Neria the moment she served him millet beer with lowered eyes and her wrapper drawn tight across her waist. "I see why the sun is jealous of your home, Obina," Zuberi had chuckled, eyeing Neria shamelessly. "You've married a queen without a throne." Obina had laughed then, brushing off the comment. But as Zuberi returned again and again, bringing sacks of rice, bolts of fabric, cattle and coin, the compliments became clearer in intention. And Obina, once a man who held Neria's face and kissed her scars, began to see her differently. Not as the mother of his unborn children, but as the prize he could trade for a place at Zuberi's table. He began staying out late, ignoring her meals, dismissing her questions, belittling her laughter. Neria felt it, the shift, like rain clouds gathering without thunder. She waited for storms that never came, only silence. And the silence was worse. The night it happened, there was no ceremony. No warning. Zuberi arrived with more than gifts. This time, he came with paper, a binding agreement between men, signed in sweat and sealed with greed. Obina didn't look her in the eye when he said it. "You're going to be Zuberi's now. He's offered me land and 5,000 sadies. We need to think of the future." "The future?" Neria's voice cracked like dry bark underfoot. "What future do I have if I'm no longer your wife?" Obina's face hardened, stone behind eyes that once softened at her smile. "This is not about feelings. This is about survival. You'll live better under his roof. You'll wear silk. You'll eat meat every day." "But I'm not for sale, Obina." "I was never yours to trade." "You're my wife. You do as I say." Zuberi, watching from the shadows like a snake under a mango tree, said nothing. He simply smiled. That night, Neria sat beneath the baobab tree, the one her mother used to sit under with her when she was a girl, telling stories about the strength of women, the courage of queens, the cunning of trickster spirits who outwitted giants. But there were no giants in Neria's story. Just men who thought power was theirs to claim, and women they believed were property. By dawn, she had been moved to Zuberi's compound. The servants treated her well enough, too well in fact, like something polished and precious. But there was no warmth, only the cold shine of gold against mud walls. Zuberi never forced her, no, he was more patient than that. He'd speak gently, bring her rare perfumes, silk from the north, even mangoes from the coast. He'd tell her how much smarter she was than the other wives, how much more she could become, if only she opened her heart. But Neria said little. She obeyed when she had to. She smiled when she must. Inside, she plotted. Because women like her were born with more than beauty. They were born with memory, and hers burned hotter than fire. Months passed, and the other wives began to resent her. She was younger, sharper, and somehow always 5 steps ahead. She knew where Zuberi stored his keys. She knew which guards drank too much palm wine at night. She knew the secret passage between the compound and the shrine house. While the others fought for Zuberi's attention, she studied him. She studied his business, his weaknesses, the men he trusted, the ones he feared. She learned that his hold on the village was not as firm as it seemed, that beneath the surface of his empire were cracks, lies, enemies waiting for a reason to strike. And she learned of Obina, now living lavishly in a new house built with her bride price. He paraded around with a younger woman, one who didn't ask questions. He boasted about his connections to Zuberi, about how smart he'd been to trade a simple wife for land and gold. Neria's heart didn't ache anymore. It burned. And from that fire came her plan. She began planting ideas in Zuberi's ear. Whispers of threats from rival chiefs, suggestions for alliances that placed her name subtly in meetings. She began offering advice that saved him money, prevented betrayal. Slowly, Zuberi began relying on her. He gave her keys, trusted her with ledgers, let her sit in on business dealings. The other wives noticed, and so did the council elders. They grumbled but said nothing. For Zuberi was growing richer, stronger, more ruthless, and behind it all was Neria. But Neria didn't want money. She didn't want power as a trophy wife. She wanted freedom. And revenge. The turning point came when Zuberi fell ill. A sudden fever, one no medicine man could explain. The village trembled, for if the lion falls, the jackal circle. But Neria stepped up. She managed the house, led meetings, and when Zuberi grew too weak to speak, she signed his name to decrees. Slowly, she made herself necessary. Irreplaceable. Respected. But not loved, and that suited her just fine. Then came the harvest festival. A time when all chiefs gathered under one canopy, and villagers danced beneath the stars. Neria walked into the arena not as a wife, but as a queen. Draped in white and gold, she commanded silence with her presence. Obina was there too, drinking and bragging. Until he saw her. He choked on his wine. His mouth opened, but no words came. She walked past him as if he were dust. But her eyes spoke. You sold me like a goat. Now watch me rule the herd. By the end of that night, Zuberi had collapsed completely. And Neria, backed by forged documents, loyal guards and secrets she had collected like arrows, took his seal. The council, faced with chaos or continuity, chose her. After all, she had been running things for months. And so, the girl who had been sold like cattle, now sat where kings once knelt. But this was only the beginning. Because kingdoms built on betrayal have long shadows. And Neria was about to find out just how far those shadows stretched. Power does not come softly to women. It comes like a river bursting its banks, feared, doubted, tested. And for Neria, now lady of the Zuberi estate and ruler over a growing coalition of lands, the river had just begun to rise. Whispers swirled around her like dust in the dry season. Some called her a witch. Others, a genius. A few, who remembered the young girl who once sang to the birds and laughed in the mango orchard, dared to call her victim. But Neria had no use for their definitions. She had learned that the world saw women not as whole, but as roles, wife, widow, whore, queen, and none of those fit her anymore. She was something else. Something forged in betrayal and remade in silence. In the early months of her rule, she moved like a shadow, watching, calculating. She didn't rush to where the crown Zuberi once boasted about. She let the people come to her. She visited markets, sat with elders under moonlight, listened to traders and hunters alike. They spoke to her not because of who she was married to, but because she listened in ways Zuberi never did. The more she listened, the more power she gained, not through fear or force, but through trust. She fixed broken roads. She ended the market taxes that had bled the women vendors dry. She passed laws that allowed widows to keep their land instead of losing it to their husbands' brothers. And slowly, the same men who once scoffed at her presence in the council chamber now sought her favor. But power, like heat, draws snakes. And not all were pleased with her rise. Chief Dubé, Zuberi's cousin, was the first to challenge her authority. A woman cannot lead warriors, he spat in front of the council one evening. This is not the way of our fathers. Neria had only smiled, her voice calm and low, like the rumble before a storm. Our fathers also bathed in rivers where crocodiles lived. Must we follow every old way just because it is old? The room had gone silent. Dubé blustered, but his words landed like stones in mud. The council saw something in Neria they couldn't quite name, not just intelligence, but inevitability. She did not force her will. She made it impossible to ignore. But Neria had not forgotten Obina. In fact, his name echoed more loudly now than ever. After she had passed a land tax that favored the commoners and cut off the flow of wealth to Zuberi's old allies, Obina found himself choking on debt. His lavish new house was falling apart, the woman he had replaced her with had run off with a traitor, and he was left a man who had gambled his heart for gold and lost both. Word reached Neria that he had been arrested for attempting to forge trade documents in her name. The news should have pleased her, but it didn't. Something in her still twisted when she heard his name. Not love. Not pity. Perhaps memory. She didn't send him to prison. No. That would be too merciful. Instead, she summoned him, publicly. He arrived in chains, escorted by guards, his clothes ragged, his eyes sunken. When he entered her great hall, a room once reserved for Zuberi's political games, he could barely look up. The villagers filled the space, waiting, whispering, watching. Neria sat not on a throne, but on a carved stool beside her advisors, humble yet unmovable. "Obina," she said quietly, "do you know why I called you here?" He lifted his eyes, and for the first time, she saw it, not pride, not regret, but something far more hollow. He was broken. A man who realized too late that gold rusts faster than loyalty. "I don't know," he muttered. "Perhaps to punish me." She shook her head. "I called you because the people need to see the cost of greed. You were not the first man to sell a woman. But you will be the first to stand before her as she leads the land you tried to buy." Gasps echoed in the hall. Some laughed. Others wept. And Obina dropped to his knees, not in protest, but in surrender. "I was wrong," he said, voice cracking. "I thought power came from men. I didn't know it could come from pain." Neria nodded. "It doesn't come from pain. It comes from surviving it." She did not imprison him. Instead, she gave him a small piece of land at the edge of the village, where the soil was dry and hard, but fertile if worked long enough. "Start again," she told him. "And let your hands do what your heart failed to." The act stunned the council. Mercy was not the way of their fathers either. But it was the way of a new ruler, one who remembered everything, yet did not let vengeance rot her vision. Because Neria was not building an empire of fear. She was building a future. As the years passed, Neria's legend grew. Trade routes flourished under her guidance. Young girls came to study law and storytelling in her compound, learning how words could rebuild worlds. Widows who had once worn rags now managed farms and sat on advisory boards. Even the neighboring villages, once resistant, sent their sons and daughters to learn under her name. But perhaps the most telling sign of change came from Zuberi's former allies. Chiefs who had watched her ascent with suspicion now sent her gifts and proposals for unity. She met each one carefully, ensuring that no man mistook her diplomacy for dependence. She never remarried. Many tried, noblemen, travelers, even a prince from across the river who claimed he could give her a greater kingdom. She turned them all away. Not because she hated men, but because she no longer needed one to stand tall. One night during the Harmattan, when the winds blew red dust across the sky like angry spirits, she walked again to the baobab tree, older now, wiser, and alone. She sat beneath it, just as she had years ago after Obina sold her, and she remembered. The sting. The silence. The soft whisper of her mother's voice saying, "You are not what happens to you, child. You are what you become after it." She had become more than wife. More than widow. More than ruler. She had become a mirror, in which others saw what they feared, what they loved, and what they could never control. The stars above flickered, and a soft wind kissed her cheeks. Somewhere in the distance, a girl's voice echoed, laughter bold and unafraid, like the first note in a new song. And Neria, the woman once traded like cattle, closed her eyes and smiled. Because some women are not born queens. They rise as one.